Welcome back to Preservation Travels with Lane and Kevin. Today we are going to show you a home that's been in the family for 7 generations.
I'm Marcia Colson. This is my family home, built for my great-great-grandparents in 1853. I grew up here in the 1960s when this was a working cotton plantation. 7 generations of my family have owned and lived in and celebrated Christmases and birthdays and Thanksgiving and weddings and even funerals for 170 years. And actually, our earlier ancestor was here in the 1780s in a different house that burned. This house is built partly on the foundation of that house, and that leads to another interesting, significant story that I'll tell you in a little while. One interesting feature of this house is that it had gas chandeliers in all the buildings, not just the main house, at a time when Natchez downtown had gas lights on one block. And this home is one of 3 private homes in the Natchez area that did have gas chandeliers because they had their own gas plants. And so it's apparently, I've been told, a very simple process to manufacture gas from coal, and the process of conversion creates pressure, and that's what pushes the gas through the pipes. It was also convenient to have these chandeliers with the gas pipes in later years because in about 1940, when they finally got electricity here, the gas pipes provided good conduit for the electrical wiring. They were made by the Cornelius and Baker Company in Philadelphia. Many houses in Natchez have those fixtures. They were very, very popular. And the company was so renowned because they made fixtures for the White House, Buckingham Palace, the Kremlin, and the Élysée Palace. We have about half a dozen things in this house from Robert E. Lee's family home, Stratford Hall in Virginia. And we're not related to the Lee family, but through a marriage connection, when the Lee home was sold, the person that inherited them married into our family. We're not descended from her because she died young, unfortunately, but she inherited these pieces and they stayed in our family. And so I'll point them out as we go through, and I'll just point out right now Mr. Somerville, who was the man who bought the Lee home, and it was his daughter who inherited the items. Two of the items that came from Stratford Hall are these two chairs upholstered in red leather. This one we loved when we were children because it has this big lion or dog with an open mouth and a red tongue, and as children we would run up to it and stick our finger in really quickly and then pull it out and pretend he was going to bite us. And the other chair is this cockfighting chair, and unfortunately cockfighting has been legal in Louisiana and Mississippi within recent history, I think within the last 20 or 30 years. Not legal at all now, but it was for a long time. And so this is a chair for a man to sit in, and some of you may remember that men used to like to sit in chairs backwards and put their hand on the back of the chair or their arms, and that's what this is for. You'd straddle it, put your arms over it, and watch the cockfight. Now let's go into the parlor. I think the most interesting thing in this room is the wallpaper, and there are two different kinds of wallpaper in here. The portion that has a lot of beautiful flowers in it, although they're faded. You'll see a marble statue that looks like a woman with a marble urn of flowers on her head. And then there's a surrounding border of flowers. And all of that was made by the Zuber Company, which is still in business in France near Strasbourg. And interestingly enough, they are still making wallpaper with their original hand-carved wood blocks. The other wallpaper, which is gray and white and looks like it's edged with a pretty golden brown, was made by another French company that opened for business in 1851, only 2 years before the house was built, which is a really good indicator of how much the wealthy people in this area knew about housing and decor in the early 1850s. And I've learned just recently in the last 6 months that this wallpaper, the gray and white wallpaper, is also on one of the walls in Versailles. Natchez was occupied by Union soldiers in 1863, and although for the most part it was a pretty friendly and sometimes amicable and social occupation, it of course was war, and unpleasant things happen in war. And I have read a letter from one of my great-great-grandparents expressing their concern about what might happen. They worded it very, very carefully. But my grandfather and my great-aunt, who grew up here with their grandparents, told us that during the war they had the butler take all the silver and hide it under the parlor. And why under the parlor? Because there was a house here in the 1780s that burned. This house was built partly on the foundations, and there was a remnant of a cistern from that former house. So they took all the silver, hid it in the parlor, and it was a good thing because in January of 1865, Union soldiers broke into the house. And if you want to hear the details of that, you'll need to come see my tour. All right, now let's go into the dining room. Okay. The wallpaper in the dining room has an interesting story also. It was made in New York in the 1940s, but made with the Zuber hand-carved wood blocks. And the reason it was made there was because the Zuber Company sent those blocks to this country for safety during World War II. And I can date it because I have a letter from my great aunt who wrote to the company in New York, got a sample of it, and ordered it in 1947. And right next to it, I have a photograph of my mother's wedding day where she and my father were here at the dining table cutting their wedding cake with the new wallpaper in the background. The portrait over the mantel is my great-great-grandfather, George Marshall I, and it was done by a man named Louis Bain. We pronounce it Bain, it's spelled B-A-H-I-N. And he came from France. He had an exhibit at the Louvre before he left France, and he came to this country and actually settled in Natchez and still has descendants living in this area. And the portrait over the larger sideboard is George's father, Levin Marshall, so he's my great-great-great-grandfather. He came here as a young man in the early 1800s and started out in a clerical position in a bank, and within about 10 years had created a fortune for himself. And this is a Thomas Sully portrait. The most interesting silver piece in the house is this egg cooker. It's for soft-cooked eggs, and it has a little fuel lamp underneath. We would use sterno nowadays. And here's a little timer, a sand timer. And inside, you would put the water in, get the flame burning, wait until it boils, open it up again, and put in your tray of eggs, close it up, and turn the timer, and you have perfectly soft-cooked eggs, just the way I like them. Now, my grandfather said they must have used it in his day because he said, if you want to use it to cook eggs, you have to use room temperature eggs because this was made before refrigeration. We're in the back hall now, and this has for generations been the family sitting room. My grandfather told us that growing up with his grandparents after the war, they were, of course, very, very wealthy at one time, and they didn't lose everything, but they came on hard times after the war. My great-great-grandmother sold butter and eggs in town to help make ends meet. And we're told that she installed a potbelly stove right here by the door that goes into what's now our kitchen, and then hung a tapestry in the center of the hall from the ceiling all the way down to the floor between the dining room and the middle bedroom to try to shut off this part of the house to create a little warmth, because there was never any heating system for this huge hall until the 1970s when we installed central air and heat. Now we're in the front bedroom, right across the hall from the parlor. And it probably would have been a small parlor or a music room if the house had been finished as was intended. This was intended to be a two-story house, and all the bedrooms would have been upstairs. But for reasons we're not sure of, not directly because of the Civil War, but for some reason of concern, the second floor was never finished. So this has always been the master bedroom, and it's actually my favorite room in the house. This bed is well known and respected. Often when beds similar to this go up for sale in the New Orleans auction houses, it's referred to as the Lansdowne bed. And the interesting thing about this bed is that it has retained its fixtures for mosquito nets. So the brass rods and the cords are devised so that mosquito nets would hang one in front of each post in the back. And to pull the net around the bed, you just pull on the cord with the long tassel, and the bar at the back will come forward, and as it comes forward, it's pulling the nets up to the side of the bed so that when you get ready to get in bed, you lap one net over the other, jump in before the mosquitoes can get you, And then you pull up the posts to keep the gnat off your feet. And I say this is one thing that is very good about the same family staying in the same place for a long time. Because I'm pretty sure if this bed had got out of the family and ended up in an auction house or an antique shop, whoever bought it or whoever sold it would have taken off all these fixtures and you would just have a bed because you don't need this. But because we stayed here and didn't see any reason to remove the mosquito net fixtures, even after we got electricity and air conditioning, we have this to show a little bit of what life was like here. This has always been a bedroom, but it was intended to be a library. And this room didn't have an overhead chandelier originally. My grandmother purchased this chandelier and installed it probably in the 1980s. And the reason it didn't have an overhead chandelier was that it had wall brackets. So there are 4 lamps in this room, 2 on either side of the mantel and 2 on either side of the dressing table, that were gas lamps. And they are adjustable. They're hinged at 2 places so they can easily be adjusted for reading. And this was my grandmother's room for most of her life, so it got a lot of use because she was the heart of the family. The people building these homes wanted to have the best, or they wanted to look like they had the best. And they used a lot of cypress in the wood, particularly for the doors and the supports, because it was plentiful and resistant to termites, but they didn't like the look of it. So they had an expert hand paint a golden oak grain on the doors. They loved golden oak, and we still have those original hand-painted doors. And fortunately, we have a craftsman in Natchez who can reproduce the golden oak faux finish as beautifully as the craftsman did in the mid-19th century. And the other thing they did was to paint the baseboards to match the marble in the mantels. So the mantels in the parlor and dining room are Italian Carrara marble, and the baseboards painted to match have not held up well because they were white, and white paint doesn't age well, but the black Egyptian mantels had matching baseboards in the 2 bedrooms, and there's one little piece of that original faux marble or false painted marble that has held up very nicely. Traditionally, this would have been a work area with a lot of big old tables for cleaning and polishing and cutting things up, but it's our outdoor seating area now, and we love it. The 2 buildings at the back of the house are dependencies that were built about the same time as the main house, and they were used primarily for utilitarian purposes: a governess's room and a school room, a billiard room and an office, and a kitchen and a washing and ironing room, and then rooms for 2 or 3 of the house servants, the cook and the nurse. And the nurse was married to the butler, so he lived there too. And the thing I like best about this area is this chandelier, which was up in the attic in disrepair for many years. My uncle and his son repaired it and made it beautiful again. And it hangs here as a back gallery chandelier, but it was actually the chandelier for the billiard table. These 2 dependencies at the back of the house have been renovated now, and they're available for overnight lodgings through Airbnb or VRBO, or through contacting us directly. So we have 2 large apartments and 1 full house, all with fully stocked kitchens and a laundry. Thanks for viewing our property today. It's been our home for many, many years, and we love it, and we love to share it with people. I find that one of the best ways to learn about history is to visit the places where it happened. And this house is like a little history lesson, because all the lives that have been lived in this house and all the furnishings tell little bits and pieces that combine to form a story of over 200 years of history here. So we're open on a daily basis by appointment and for formal tours during spring and fall pilgrimage, and we hope you'll come visit us then.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this tour of Lansdowne, a Natchez landmark. Thank you so much, Marcia Colson, for this wonderful tour. Guys, we love to show you history, we love to show you architecture, and if you love those things, give our channel a subscribe, follow along with us on our restoration projects, and we'll see you next time on Preservation Travels with Lane and Kevin.